Hey everybody, Brian Von Via here, back at it again with another set of D&D stories or topics, and today we're going to be talking about why did TSR and WotC choose Forgotten Realms over Greyhawk as the main setting of D&D. It's because TSR kicked Gary Gygax out in 1985 from a long, bloody corporate battle with the Blooms and Lorraine Williams. Gary Gygax retained the rights to Gord from the Greyhawk novels, so TSR could not release more novels with Gord as the hero. They had to hire Rose Estes to continue the adventures in Greyhawk with a new set of characters, but her books were not as iconic and, well, frankly, nobody remembers them today. I sure don't, and I read a fair few of them back then. For better or for worse, what sets the campaign settings apart from each other are the iconic characters and the stories told in them. It is these stories and tales of heroism which grip the minds and imaginations of the public. Without iconic characters and stories, a campaign setting is just a generic setting. Even the more exotic ones like Dark Sun and Eberron, which is why they never caught on. Gord was Greyhawk to an entire generation of D&D fans, and without him, Greyhawk shriveled and died. Dragonlance was the behemoth during the time of Gygax's ouster, but during this time, Williams experimented with a lot of settings and released Dark Sun, Spelljammer, and Ravenloft. But it was the Forgotten Realms setting that stuck with the gaming public, most likely due to the unheralded success of R.A. Salvatore's Icewind Dale novels, which managed to eclipse even the extremely popular Dragonlance novels. Although the Forgotten Realms was Ed Greenwood's baby, and his Mordenkainen Gandalf stand-in, Elmster, was supposed to be the most iconic character in the setting, there is no doubt that the most famous standard-bearer of the Forgotten Realms is the unlikely hero, Drizzt Do'Urden, who continued to expand his legacy, starring in another 30 novels or so since then. R.A. Salvatore was still writing Drizzt books as recently as 2016. That's how iconic and popular Drizzt is, and Wizards might still be asking him to write more in the future. You never know. This cemented the realm's popularity as BioWare came into the picture and created the massively hyped Baldur's Gate, which today is still the iconic Dungeons & Dragons video game for the entire generation of D&D players. Drizzt even appears in the Baldur's Gate games. So by the time 5th edition came around, Wizards simply decided to use the most popular, iconic setting for D&D as the default. You could say that the Forgotten Realms became the default setting simply because of one man, Drizzt. Greyhawk was the default 1st edition setting, and then others at TSR ousted Gary Gygax from ownership. Wanting to make a clean break from the Gygax era, they sought out another flagship setting. Dragonlance was around, but Dragonlance is really all about the heroes of the Lance and their adventures. They wanted something more open and less restrictive. And then, someone noticed this material getting published to Dungeons & Dragons magazines from a guy named Ed Greenwood. He was contacted, and he convinced them that he had this whole world already made. Well, he didn't, but that didn't really matter. Whenever they asked for something new, he created it on the spot and mailed it to them. Yes, actual mail, since this was pre-internet era. They also brought in other material, the Bloodstone lands with the associated battle system rules, the Moonshae Isles, Bob Salvatore's Drizzt and Friends. So by the time 2nd edition hit, they had what they wanted, a make-it-anything-you-want Forgotten Realms. And then they went on to publish lots of books and video games for it. They also produced a bunch of other settings, some like Dark Sun were niche settings. Some they simply incorporated into the Forgotten Realms, such as Mazdaca and Karatur. When 3rd edition came out, they had a competition basically looking for the next Ed Greenwood. That's where Eberron came from. But it never really caught on like FR did, for a lot of reasons. And so now, through 2 more editions, Forgotten Realms is still the king of the hill. Even if they did screw it up with the 4th edition era, Go spell plague. Oh God, don't address the elephants in the room here. What's curious to me is that 5th edition is all about Sword Coast North. There's so much more to the realms. I, for one, run nearly all of my games in the Dalelands, Moonsea, and Cormier area. There's just so much to pull from there, but I basically set my clock at the mid-1360s to early 1370s for all of my games. Dungeons & Dragons passed from TSR's ownership upon its acquisition by Wizards of the Coast. Along with that acquisition incorporated came all of the intellectual property originally owned by TSR, including both Greyhawk, the original D&D setting, and the then relative upstart Forgotten Realms. Forgotten Realms was published in the 2nd edition days, and being a little more open than Greyhawk, became the default setting post-Gygax. When the Wizards of the Coast acquired D&D, they reinstituted Greyhawk as the default campaign setting, but subsequent editions reversed that stance to this day. Forgotten Realms remains the default. From a business perspective, most of the licensed video games are set in the Forgotten Realms, so it has the largest installed base of people familiar with it, a built-in market of possible customers. That's why. In addition to all the other history mentioned here, very honestly, and having owned both, Greyhawk is boring as hell. As I recall, I gave away my collection in the late 90s due to, bad reasons. The text for the most of the countries was limited to country name, ruler, ruling factions, population, major cities, heraldry, and a dry paragraph regarding political plans. Even without the friction between Gygax and TSR, the setting was very wargamey, with little to recommend it as a fantasy world, like how I view Game of Thrones. Greenwood, one of the earlier DMs of D&D, was already publishing stories and articles about Forgotten Realms in Dragon Magazine, and his tales reeked of high magic and fascinating plots and people, interesting tidbits about the world, and more. Dragonlance, a brief contender, wasn't nearly as fleshed out and included Kender, a very controversial breed of halfling that was either reveled or loved, depending on the DM and party. Although a setting was published, it didn't last long. While the early stories of Forgotten Realms tended to relate to Greenwood's own Dale's campaign, this world was quickly becoming more fleshed out and real than either of the other two. It was pretty much a no-brainer to publish this as a setting. Ed Greenwood. When TSR, who published D&D before Wizards of the Coast, was looking for a setting to base D&D on, they really didn't have much. Gygax was mechanics and not lore. Greenwood had been writing for TSR Magazine, and TSR asked if he had enough. He said he did, and they agreed to publish his novels in exchange for his work on Tamriel. He gave them a banker box full of maps and writings, and they went off to work on it. Then they got another, and another. Then several more. I can't remember the number because I was all of 10 at the time, but I still read TSR Magazine. I think it was 22 boxes of writings about Forgotten Realms, something like 24,000 pages. Oh my god. But TSR and later Wizards of the Coast gradually turned that into several dozen source books and campaign settings, and Greenwood published about 30 books on TSR's dime. So, in brief, the largest difference between Greyhawk and Forgotten Realms. We'll start with Greyhawk. I actually own this book. In true Tolkien-esque fashion, several pages are spent discussing trees. Made primarily by Gary Gygax for his home campaign, and then expanded upon. The original official setting got most of the support back when D&D was run by TSR. Compared to FR, it was a low magic realm designed to feel like Europe in the early Middle Ages. The primary campaign area is comparatively smaller. I've heard stories that the original map was simply a tweaked version of the Great Lakes region of North America, and how, even now, most of the action takes place on a large peninsula of a single continent. Now let's take a look at the Forgotten Realms. I love the first part. Sadly, this one lacks a chapter on trees. Made originally by Ed Greenwood when he made up stories as a youngster, then adapted to D&D when he discovered it. This current official setting and has been given more attention than Greyhawk since Gygax left TSR. There might have been some lawsuits that helped the transition along. In its current incarnation, designed to be generic, low-grade fantasy, the world is coded in low-level magic, and the setting has a vaguely 12th century vibe. Has specific regions with exotic flavors such as Asia Land, Karatur, and Desert Land, Al-Qadim. Huge, but focused on specific corners. For example, many of the books and video games featuring the Forgotten Realms focus on the Sword Coast, which is a region about the size and temperament of the Pacific Northwest. Personal opinion, I've played and run campaigns in both settings, among others. As a player, I had a definite preference for the Forgotten Realms, although that may be flavored by the DMs. I've had more than the settings. You 5 are all level 5, so a reasonable fight is 34th level barbarians with a flying ship. I wish I was making that up. I need to know details. As a DM, though, I like both. The Forgotten Realms is best when I want to adapt the currently available campaigns and adventures. I wouldn't run Rise of Tiamat as written, that was a mess, or when I'm feeling lazy, because most of the world building is already done for me. Thanks in no small part to Ed Greenwood's desire to pump out literal encyclopedias of lore, you can pick a random point on the map and be reasonably sure there's 3,000 years of history to be found there. I'm teasing, most spots have far more history, a bunch of the characters have far more history. Now, Greyhawk is great if you have veteran players that you want to surprise and they're all younger than, 40? You can pull out the old adventure modules, do some heavy editing. No, I don't care if you think it's necessary to the plot. I am not forcing the party to become slaves, scourge of the slave lords, and present your group with some truly old-school dungeon-crawling dinger. And the Greyhawk random encounter tables did not mess around. You had a non-zero chance of running into entire armies of orcs, ancient dragons, or the occasional god. If you wanted game balance, you should have played chess instead. Overall, if you're a hip, young app and this is your first D&D game, I'd say go with the Forgotten Realms. If you've been playing so long that you can remember hitting up Ask Jeeves for advice, maybe try Greyhawk out. Are you calling me out for using Ask Jeeves, my guy? I don't know about you. Hey everybody, Brian Von VA checking in after the vid. Please make sure to leave a like, subscribe, ring that bell, and of course, make sure to stay safe, happy, and healthy because we love each and every one of you. Stay safe. We'll be back soon. See you later.